There are millions of people around the world who speak English and still cannot fully understand Jamaicans. Not because Jamaicans are speaking incorrectly, not because the words are random, but because hidden inside Jamaican Patois is something older than Jamaica itself, a memory carried across the Atlantic, a language born in one of the darkest chapters of human history that somehow still found a way to sing. And centuries later, the tree still stands. If you walk through the streets of Kingston, Montego Bay, Spanish Town, or even Jamaican communities overseas in places like London, Toronto, or New York, you hear something instantly recognizable. Not just an accent, a rhythm, a bounce, a kind of musical flow that feels completely different from standard English. Words seem to bend, sentences move differently, emotion sits close to the surface. Even simple conversations can sound poetic. To outsiders, Jamaican Patois can feel fast, mysterious, even impossible to fully understand at times. Many people hear English words, yet still struggle to follow what is being said. For years, people dismissed it as slang or broken English. But that completely misses the deeper story, because Jamaican Patois is not simply English spoken differently. It is the result of collision, of survival, of memory refusing to disappear. To understand why Jamaican Patois sounds so different, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to the ships, back to the plantations, back to the violent creation of the transatlantic slave trade system. The people forced onto Jamaican plantations from the 1600s to the 1800s did not come from one place. They came from many regions across Africa, from the Gold Coast to present-day Congo and Angola, carrying different languages, beliefs, and memories. Many came from present-day Ghana, Nigeria, and the Congo region, but they did not all speak the same language. Some spoke Akan languages, others Igbo, others Yoruba, others Kikongo. Different nations, different cultures, different spiritual systems. And suddenly, all of them were forced together under brutal conditions where communication became necessary for survival. Imagine the reality of that for a moment. People separated from homeland, family, and language, trying to understand one another in an unfamiliar world controlled by English-speaking colonizers. A new way of speaking had to emerge fast. At first, enslaved Africans learned enough English to obey commands and survive plantation life. But they did not simply abandon the linguistic systems they had already carried inside them. Instead, something remarkable happened. English vocabulary mixed with African speech patterns. African rhythm shaped English words. African grammar influenced sentence structure, and over generations, Jamaican Patois was born. That is why it sounds so different, because underneath many of the English words, the soul of the language moves differently. Words like nyam, meaning to eat, trace back to Akan languages from West Africa. Uno, meaning all of you, reflects West African plural speech structures still alive in Jamaican conversations centuries later. Even Anansi, the famous trickster spider from Jamaican folklore, comes directly from Akan storytelling traditions carried across the Atlantic by enslaved Africans. These are not random similarities. They are fragments of memory, pieces of Africa surviving inside ordinary speech. And maybe that is one of the most emotional parts of the story, because so much else was taken. Names were erased, families separated, spiritual traditions suppressed. Drums were even banned in some colonies because plantation owners feared communication and rebellion among enslaved Africans. Yet, language still survived. Not perfectly, not unchanged, but enough. Enough to leave fingerprints all over Jamaican culture centuries later, and the survival went deeper than vocabulary alone. What truly survived was rhythm. Many West African languages place enormous importance on tone, cadence, repetition, and musical delivery. Speech is not always separated from performance. Emotion and storytelling are woven directly into communication itself. You can still hear vibrations of that in Jamaican Patois today. Going to becomes gwan. Them becomes them. I am going becomes me a go. Speech becomes faster, warmer, more expressive. Not lazy, efficient, alive. And oral storytelling played a massive role in preserving that identity. Long before reggae spread Jamaican culture across the earth, stories carried memory from one generation to another, especially Anansi stories. Anansi was the clever spider trickster from Akan folklore, a small figure constantly surviving against larger enemies through intelligence and wit. For enslaved Africans in Jamaica, those stories carried deeper meaning. The weak surviving powerful systems, the trapped finding ways to outsmart oppression. These stories became cultural survival tools, and importantly, they survived through speech, through oral tradition. Grandparents told them to children, communities repeated them, no books required. The voice itself became an archive. That mattered because literacy was often restricted under slavery. Written history could be controlled. Spoken memory could travel freely. And over generations, Jamaican Patois became more than communication. It became identity itself. You can feel that identity especially strong through Jamaican music. The entire earth learned to recognize Jamaican rhythm through music long before many people understood the deeper linguistic history underneath it. When reggae music exploded worldwide through artists like Bob Marley, millions of people were hearing Jamaican Patois for the first time, and it sounded completely different from anything else. Warm, hypnotic, musical. Even people who could not understand every word could feel the emotion inside it. That emotional directness became part of Jamaica's worldwide cultural influence. Then, dancehall pushed the sound even further. Faster delivery, sharper wordplay, explosive rhythm. The language itself almost became percussion, and over time, Jamaican speech patterns began influencing cultures far beyond the Caribbean. British slang absorbed Jamaican expressions through Caribbean migration to the UK. Hip-hop absorbed dancehall cadence. Toronto speech patterns carry strong Caribbean influence today. Even internet slang now carries Jamaican phrasing. Words like ting, gyal, and wagwan spread across social media and music culture worldwide, often without people realizing where they came from. That is extraordinary when you think about it. A language born under slavery eventually helped shape worldwide music and youth culture, not through military power, not through empire, through cultural survival. But despite this influence, Jamaican Patois has often faced misunderstanding, even inside Jamaica itself. For generations, colonial systems treated standard British English as the proper way to speak. Patois was sometimes viewed as informal, uneducated, or something to hide in professional settings. That pressure affected generations of Jamaicans. Many learned to switch between standard English and Patois depending on the environment. School in one voice, home in another, formal spaces in one tone, family conversations in another. Yet, despite that pressure, Patois never disappeared. And honestly, this is not unique to my Jamaica, land of my birth. Since returning to Africa, the land of my ancestors, I've noticed the same pattern across many former European colonies. The official language often dominates schools, government, and professional life, while the mother tongue rules everyday conversation. People move between languages constantly, depending on the environment they are in. Sometimes, people ask me what my mother tongue is, and for a long time I answered with a quiet sense of loss. English. Because my real mother tongue was shaped somewhere between Africa and the Caribbean, between life before the chains and life after it. It may not belong to one tribe or one nation anymore, but it carries pieces of many. My mother tongue is Patois, because language tied to identity rarely disappears easily, especially when it carries emotional truth. Today, linguists increasingly recognize Jamaican Patois as a fully developed Creole language with its own structure, logic, and evolution. It is not random speech. It has patterns, consistency, grammar, rules. But beyond all the linguistic analysis, something deeper still lives inside it. Human adaptation. Because Jamaican Patois represents what happens when displaced people rebuild identity from fragments. A little English vocabulary, a little Akan rhythm, a little Igbo structure, a little Congo spirituality, a little survival from everywhere. And somehow, from all those broken pieces, something entirely new emerged. Something unmistakably Jamaican. Understanding language is not just about vocabulary. It is about cultural rhythm, shared timing, emotional cues, tone, delivery, memory. You can study the words and still miss the soul of the language completely. Because Jamaican Patois lives inside feeling as much as meaning. The same phrase can sound playful, threatening, affectionate, or hilarious depending on the cadence alone. Humor hides inside timing, respect hides inside phrasing, music hides inside ordinary conversation. And maybe that musicality explains why Jamaican culture became so influential worldwide, despite Jamaica being a relatively small island. Jamaica's voice traveled farther than its size ever should have allowed, because authenticity travels. And wherever Jamaicans migrated, the language evolved again. And perhaps that is the real story hidden underneath Jamaican Patois. Not simply why it sounds different, but why it survived at all. Against overwhelming pressure, people separated from homeland and ancestry still managed to preserve fragments of memory through speech. An emotional way of speaking that refused to vanish. That is why Jamaican Patois cannot honestly be dismissed as broken English. Broken things do not survive this long. Broken things do not shape worldwide music. Broken things do not carry generations of memory inside ordinary conversation. Jamaican Patois is living history, a language shaped by displacement, creativity, pain, adaptation, and resilience. And maybe that is why it feels so powerful even to people who do not fully understand it. Because somewhere underneath the words, people recognize something deeply human, something authentic. A people refusing to lose themselves completely. A culture keeping its roots alive through voice, through sound. And after everything history tried to erase, the tree still stands. This has been DeepRoots. Thank you for watching. If this story resonated with you, like, share, subscribe, and join us for the next journey beneath the surface. Until next time, stay rooted.